My name is Rachel Voss and I am 29 years old. 3 days after I gave birth, my father walked into the hospital room, looked at my newborn son, and said, "He should go to your brother. You are not stable enough to raise him." He had already spoken to the nurses about temporary guardianship papers. He had already told my brother the child would be better off with him. I did not scream. I did not cry in front of him. I waited until he left the room, picked up my phone, and pressed one button that changed everything that followed. I had always been the careful one in the family. My older brother, Daniel, was the preferred child, louder, more charming, better at performing for my father. I built my life quietly. I worked, I saved, I married a man who treated me with basic respect, and I planned for a child the same way I planned everything else, with structure and without drama. When I became pregnant, my father showed little interest until the final month. Then the questions started. Who would help me? Was I sure I could handle it? Wouldn't it be easier if the baby had a stronger household? I ignored the comments. I focused on the pregnancy and the preparations. My husband, Evan, was present and steady. We had a small but clean apartment, enough savings, and a clear plan. None of that mattered to my father once the baby arrived. The birth itself was long but uncomplicated. My son was healthy. I held him for the first time, and felt the quiet certainty that this was the one thing in my life no one else would control. That certainty lasted less than 72 hours. My father arrived on the third morning with a folder under his arm. He did not ask how I was recovering. He looked at the baby, then at me, and delivered the sentence as if it were practical advice. He should go to Daniel. You are not stable enough to raise him. I stared at him. What are you talking about? Daniel and his wife have a house. They have resources. You are still finding your feet. This is better for the child. He placed the folder on the side table. Inside were forms. Temporary guardianship language. Spaces for signatures. He had already discussed the idea with Daniel. He had already spoken to a nurse about options for family support. He spoke as if the decision was already moving forward, and I was simply being informed. I did not raise my voice. I asked him to leave the room so I could rest. He hesitated, then stepped out, clearly expecting me to think it over and accept. The moment the door closed, I picked up my phone. I opened the voice recording app one had started using months earlier whenever my father became controlling. I had recorded the entire conversation. His words were clear. The intent was clear. I saved the file, backed it up, and then pressed the button that mattered. I sent the recording, along with a short factual message, to 3 places at the same time: my attorney, the hospital social worker, and Evan. The message read, "My father just attempted to pressure me into signing temporary guardianship of my newborn over to my brother. Full recording attached. I do not consent. Please advise and intervene as needed." Then I locked the phone and waited. Within 40 minutes the social worker entered the room. Within an hour my attorney had called the hospital legal department. By early afternoon my father was no longer allowed unrestricted access to the room. The folder of forms never left the building with a signature on it. I fed my son, rested when I could, and answered only the questions that were necessary. I did not call my father. I did not call Daniel. I let the recording and the formal channels do the work. That evening Evan sat beside the bed and listened to the file once. His face stayed calm, but his hand tightened around mine. He actually thought he could take him, he said. He thought I would allow it, I answered. I did not. The hospital kept a quiet but firm boundary in place overnight. My father attempted to return the next morning, and was stopped at the nurse's station. He demanded to speak to me. I declined. He raised his voice. Security was called. He left. I stayed focused on the only thing that required my attention: the newborn in the bassinet beside me. Everything else could wait until I was ready to address it with the same precision I had used in that hospital room. One button. One recording. One clear refusal. The rest of the consequences were already in motion. The hospital discharged me on schedule. My son was healthy. The paperwork was clean. The only change was that my father's name no longer appeared on any visitor list connected to us. I went home with Evan and the baby, closed the door, and began the next phase of the response with the same precision I had used in the hospital. My attorney had already prepared a formal letter. It documented the recording, the attempted guardianship pressure, and my clear refusal. Copies were sent to my father and to Daniel by certified mail. The letter stated that any further attempt to interfere with custody or medical decisions would be treated as harassment and escalated immediately. It also requested written confirmation that both men understood the boundary. My father called the same day the letter arrived. I let it go to voicemail. His message was loud and familiar. He accused me of overreacting, of humiliating the family, and of turning a practical suggestion into a legal matter. He demanded I call him back and stop this nonsense. I saved the voicemail and did not reply. Daniel called the next morning. His tone was different, measured, almost reasonable. He claimed he had never agreed to take the baby, and that our father had exaggerated. He said he only wanted to help. I listened to the full message once, then forwarded it to my attorney without comment. Help that begins with secret discussions about guardianship does not require a response from me. I focused on the practical systems that actually mattered. I updated the emergency contacts at the pediatrician's office. I removed my father and brother from every hospital and insurance form that still listed them. I changed the locks on the apartment even though there was no immediate threat, simply because the principle was the same: access should only exist where I had granted it. Evan handled the physical changes. I handled the documentation. 2 days later my mother called. She had stayed quiet during the hospital events. Now she attempted the soft approach. "He's your father," she said. "He only wanted what was best for the baby. You're being too hard." He brought legal forms to my hospital room 3 days after I gave birth, I answered. He told me I was not stable enough to raise my own child. That is not concern. That is an attempted takeover. She tried to continue. I ended the call. The family group chat, which I had muted months earlier, began filling with indirect messages. Relatives asked whether there had been a misunderstanding. Someone suggested mediation. Someone else wrote that family should not involve lawyers. I left the chat without posting. My attorney had already advised that silence was the cleanest position while the formal record was being established. I kept a simple log. Date of the hospital conversation. Time the recording was sent. Time the social worker responded. Time the attorney's letter was delivered. Time of each subsequent call and message. The log was not emotional. It was chronological. If anyone later claimed I had invented the pressure, the timeline would answer for me. Evan and I settled into the early weeks of parenthood with deliberate structure. We divided night feeds. We tracked appointments. We declined all unsolicited visits. When my father's sister contacted me to say the family was worried, I replied with one sentence: "The situation is already being handled through proper channels." She did not write again. By the end of the second week the attempts shifted from direct pressure to reputation management. My father told a cousin that I had become unstable after the birth, and that he had only tried to protect the child. The cousin repeated the comment to someone who still spoke to me. I added the second-hand statement to the log and continued as before. I did not call the cousin. I did not issue a public correction. The formal record already contained the original audio. That was sufficient. I returned to part-time remote work when the pediatrician cleared me. The routine helped. Feeding schedules, work blocks, sleep when possible. The baby gained weight. The apartment stayed quiet. No one from my father's side crossed the threshold. On the 20th day my attorney received a short written reply from my father's lawyer. It denied any improper intent and stated that my father had only been exploring family support options. It asked that the matter be considered closed. My attorney responded with a brief note confirming that the boundary remained in place, and that any future unauthorized contact regarding the child would be documented and addressed. No further legal correspondence arrived. I did not celebrate the silence. I treated it as the expected result of clear documentation and consistent refusal. My father had tested whether I would yield under pressure in a hospital room. I had answered with a recording and a formal process. The answer was now part of the permanent record. The baby slept in the bassinet beside me while I updated the final entries in the log. Everything that needed to be secured had been secured. Everything that needed to be refused had been refused. The rest of the family could adjust or remain exactly where they were. I no longer required their adjustment to proceed. By the end of the first month, the direct contact from my father's side had stopped. The calls ended. The messages slowed to nothing. The formal letter and the hospital record had done the work I needed them to do. What remained was a quieter, more distant form of pressure that traveled through other relatives instead of arriving at my door. Aunts and cousins began offering second-hand versions of events. Some said my father was heartbroken. Others said I had overreacted to a suggestion. One relative wrote that I should consider mediation for the sake of the child. I answered none of these messages at length. When a reply was required, I kept it to a single factual sentence. The matter had already been addressed through legal and hospital channels and required no further family discussion. Most people stopped writing once they realized no emotional opening would be provided. I focused on the systems that actually sustained us. Pediatric appointments were kept. Work deadlines were met. The household schedule remained predictable. Evan and I divided responsibilities without drama. The baby continued to gain weight and meet every marker. None of these facts required validation from the people who had tried to remove him from my care. In the third month, I updated every remaining document that still listed extended family as emergency contacts. The pediatrician's office, the insurance policy, the will I had drafted during pregnancy, all of them were revised. My father's name was removed. Daniel's name was removed. The new contacts were limited to Evan, one trusted friend, and my attorney. I completed the changes online and filed the confirmations. No announcement was necessary. My mother attempted one final conversation. She called while I was feeding the baby and spoke in the careful tone she used when she wanted a soft reset. "He's still your father," she said. "This distance isn't healthy for anyone." "He brought guardianship papers to my hospital room," I answered. "He told me I was not capable of raising my own child." "The distance is the direct result of that choice." She tried to continue. I told her I needed to go and ended the call. She did not call back. I kept the original recording. I kept the certified mail receipts. I kept the hospital social work notes and the attorney correspondence. The file remained organized and untouched. I did not need to release it further. Its existence was enough to prevent any renewed attempt at control. By the 6th month, the family system had adjusted around my absence. Invitations to larger gatherings stopped arriving. Group messages no longer included my number. My father told at least one relative that I had chosen to isolate myself. I allowed the description to stand. Isolation was an inaccurate word for what I had done. I had simply refused to leave my child accessible to someone who had already tried to take him. Evan and I continued the quiet work of building a household that did not require external approval. We took the baby to routine checkups. We maintained the budget we had planned before the birth. We declined every unsolicited offer of help that came with implied authority. The days became ordinary in the best sense of the word, structured, private, and free of the need to perform stability for people who had questioned it. One afternoon an old family acquaintance stopped me outside the grocery store and said she had heard there had been trouble after the birth. I looked at her and gave the shortest true answer available. There was an attempt to interfere with custody. It was documented and stopped. There is nothing more to discuss. She nodded and moved on. I finished the shopping and went home. I do not speak to my father. I do not speak to Daniel. My mother receives only the most minimal factual replies when contact is unavoidable. The baby is healthy. The legal boundary remains in place. The recording remains filed. The one button I pressed in the hospital room, send, produced a chain of consequences that required no further escalation from me. Some people believe that family ties automatically grant decision-making power over a child. I do not share that belief. Guardianship is not a suggestion to be floated in a hospital room. It is a legal status that requires consent. When consent is refused, the conversation ends. I refused. I documented. I closed the door. That was sufficient. Thank you for watching Hidden Truth Revenge. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from. You are allowed to protect your child with the same precision others use when they try to take him. All characters, conflicts and events are fictional and created only for entertainment and educational purposes.